All right, everybody, welcome back to another special Corona Geek. Today we're joined by Bobby Rasmussen. Rasmussen, right?
That's good. Yeah,
that's good. It's close enough. He is the developer of Street Puncher, which is available on iOS. And Bobby and I met at Casual Connect in San Francisco recently. And he has a very interesting story. He is a developer and also a self-taught animator. And Street Puncher is a lot of fun. So I wanted to get him on the show and talk about it and kind of see what some of his challenges were and how he was inspired to create this game and just go from there. So Bobby, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Okay, so I want to kind of set the stage here. Give people an idea of what Street Puncher is. Just give them an overview of the game.
Yeah, totally. So Street Puncher's a pretty simple game. What I was really going for is just simple to pick up, but difficult to master. And the basic concept is you're training a fighter who's on the streets, and you train them by blocking his punches. And so his punches will come in slow at first, and then progressively get faster and faster and faster. I really wanted to foster that addictive, short gameplay, quick death mechanic. And so the average gameplay shouldn't take more than 30 to 60 seconds unless you're really, really good. But then the idea is like you're going to want to challenge your friends and compete in the leaderboards.
Okay. And I think that's an excellent description because I was playing it this morning and it is easy to pick up. But there is a moment there where you're like, things begin to speed up and you're like, oh, okay, I have to, I kind of have to think ahead. And I want to get into some of the features and talk about that other stuff here in just a second, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. And I want to get your background first so people can kind of understand where you're coming from as a developer.
Yeah, totally. I've got a bit of a unique background, I guess. So throughout college, I was a self-taught illustrator and animator. But then when I went to college, I actually decided I want to get into a technical field to try to keep a well-rounded skill set. So I got into computer science. And out of college, I ended up working in Silicon Valley as a product manager. And I've worked at Groupon and Lyft and basically became an expert in delivering products quickly. And so from there, I wanted to be able to finally, and mobile was sort of a great opportunity to do this. So I wanted to be able to finally, bring all of those skills together and actually start creating games. So I've always been passionate about games. I feel that games are the convergence of so many art forms, be it illustration, music, and engineering. And so I've always been excited about that idea, but just because of work or because it's very difficult to get into the industry, I've never actually gotten into it. And so recently I've discovered, how accessible the iOS platform is, how accessible mobile is in general now. And because of that, I've started pursuing some games. So that's sort of how I got into Street Puncher. Street Puncher was a fun idea that I had, for a fleeting second. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should start making this game. And it took me only a couple of months to actually get set up and ship it. So that's sort of the background story there. But yeah, it's been a fun journey.
So the animation piece, was that self-taught or did you have classes in college or what?
No, it's all been self-taught. I guess the best way to describe it is a lot of Googling and a lot of learning. I think what I've learned the most about any of these skills in general is just exposure is the most important aspect. Understanding who the experts in the respective field are and then how to learn from them and what tools they use are really the core building blocks for becoming at least proficient in any of these fields. So really for animation specifically, as a self-taught illustrator, I've always had my heroes, I guess, in illustration. But then beyond that, it's actually learning what is their process like? Like, how do they actually, operationalize some of the work that they do? And so I basically got an Adobe Creative Suite license, and I learned all of the Adobe tools. And so I actually have my own pretty unique workflow for animation. And for Street Puncher specifically, it's all flipbook animation. So I hand drew all of the illustrations It's, I believe, about 850 total frames that I've had to draw. And then my operational flow is basically scanning in these hand drawings and working through it with Illustrator, After Effects, and Photoshop. And then once I have all of those frames, I then go into coding, and I actually code up the animations.
You say 850 frames. That's a lot of drawing.
It's a lot of drawing, especially for what seems to be a pretty simple game. And so at the very least, I gained a huge appreciation for some of these much more complex games out there.
Well, I tell you, the work has paid off, because as I was playing the game, as I was playing Street Puncher, everything felt fluid. I've done a little bit of research into animation myself, and I can make a ball bounce across the screen. But there's a certain amount of, there's a difference between making a circle go across the screen and making a ball squish and bounce and feel like an organic thing. And Street Puncher has that. I mean, there's so as you're playing the game, one of the things I noticed is that there's a range of motion. So you're really, it's a tapper, right? So you're really tapping the screen. But it seems like there's a range of motion, and then as the Street Fighter or Street Puncher there is doing his thing, he's almost telegraphing punch, which gives you the opportunity to figure out where he's going before he hits before he hits you, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I'm actually really excited that you noticed that. But that was actually one of the biggest decisions I made, at least in the beginning, to go hand drawn. Because even though it's a lot more work than just going procedural animation, like just going straight into Illustrator or Flash, for instance, to go hand-drawn, you also have a lot more flexibility there. So I'm able to manipulate the animation so much more because of hand-drawn it. And so I've been able to put in little nuances, like you said, where like it's a guidance. You can see his eyes. So if you're actually really fast, you're actually able to look at his eyes and know where he's going to punch. And that's actually how a lot of the folks at the top of the leaderboards got there.
Well, there's a pro tip. All right.
Yeah.
I've been watching his shoulders, and when one shoulder comes up, I'm like, okay, he's going to the right, he's going to the left. But also I'm interested in how you picked the range of motion, like where the hit points are, because it seems like there are one, it doesn't feel repetitive. It definitely feels like he's there might be times when he's like punch to the same place, but then he comes in the jab in another direction, right? So which almost kind of throws you off, because you're like, yeah. Oh. But there are sort of places where you kind of get the feel after you start playing it, like he's going to hit upper left, upper right, lower, like those quadrants. But then it seems like there's a punch that's like in the middle that's not quite like you're I was off by just a little bit, right? So it's almost like a little jab. And so I'm curious as how you came up with those range of motion, those hit points.
Yeah, I mean, so that's actually a really good question. That sort of gets down to the core mechanics of the game. What I set out to do was make the game as accessible as possible, and that comes in the form of being able to pick up and understand the game, as well as just being able to play it. And so for me, what I wanted to do is I'm looking at my phone here. I wanted to try to achieve touch points up to about 2/3 of the screen, so that a user doesn't need to like stretch their thumbs to get to the top. With that said, though, it's funny that you noticed this. There is a wild card in there. And it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes there will be. I've got an algorithm that basically looks at how often you've been able to hit, and then it might throw a wild card in there, which is actually outside of that 2/3 quadrant area.
Okay, I get that now, because I get that now, because I felt like that. I felt like there was like, okay, I got this. There's these places where I can figure out the pattern, the rhythm, and then, as you say, it's sort of this wild card where it's like just about the time that you get comfortable, you're like, bam, I also liked that you do breaking of the glass, because it seems like when you come up with an idea for a game, you can kind of work out sort of the pieces like the touch interactions and things like that. But if there's a player side of it, it's almost harder to figure out, well, how do you communicate that so that the player knows that they've taken on damage or whatnot. And I like the fact that you used breaking of glass as opposed to maybe like having blood splatter. So what was your thought process there?
It's exactly what you said. I think it's important that there's an affordance on both sides to the user, either that they were successful, and so you have a fun achievement type feeling after you've successfully tapped a punch. But then also, if you fail, there needs to be some notification to the user that they've done something wrong, and that they need to fix that in some way. And so for Street Puncher, it really just came down to how do I make it so that you're immediately aware of what happened, but then it also helps teach you not to allow it to happen again. And so the way you do that is just persist the glass break, making it harder to actually tap in that area again.
Yeah. It works really well, because the first time you get a crack in the glass, you're like, oh, okay, I can't let that happen too often.
Exactly.
So you've got levels in it. It seems like you can unlock different levels of characters. What's that all about?
Yeah, so like I said, the general premise for the game is that you're training a fighter. And part of the fun is actually leveling up that fighter. And so what we've got is you've got a basic score of just punches blocked, right? But then there's also a punch point score, which is an abstraction beyond that. And that's based on a lot of different factors. So it's based on how many punches you blocked, as well as whether or not you got combinations, at what stage were you able to block punches. And because of that, with that score, you can actually use that to purchase new skins for the fighter. And the fighter then, with these new skins, will actually have a multiplier on top of it. So it'll make it a little bit easier to achieve that high score if you level up your fighter.
Oh, okay. Okay. I wasn't sure if I hadn't got there yet, so I wasn't sure if that made Street Puncher harder or if it made it easier for me as a player.
It depends, yeah. And there's some really cool skins too, so check it out.
Okay. I'll have to reach higher. Okay, so for monetization, let's talk about that real quick. I mean, what are your plans there? What are you doing?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So this being my first game, it's kind of new to me. I'm trying to figure out what the best model is. And going into the space, I did a lot of research into how other games are monetizing. And there's a few very basic things. Obviously, you either go premium or free. I wanted to create a free game because I always wanted to harken back to that general theme of accessibility. It's really easy to pick up, all the way from the App Store down to actually punching or blocking a punch. And so I made it a free game, but advertisement based. And so then what you have to think about is the variable of frequency. So how frequent should you push a user? Because you don't want to be annoying with the advertisements. And so that's something I'm testing right now to figure out what gets the best reception. I know in my personal experience, when I play with games, I actually enjoy it when the developer, admittedly, they have to have some form of monetization with advertisements. But I like it when they're upfront about it and honest about it. And so that's something that I'm striving to test out with Street Puncher. And then beyond that, I also wanted to explore in-app purchases. So by creating an in-game currency like punch points, it allowed me to allow you to purchase these skins and different features just by putting down 99 cents. And that'll also allow you to block any ads as well. And so there is that element of a premium experience, which is pretty cheap to pick up in the store.
Yeah,
so I'm testing out all of these, and I'm still not entirely certain what's successful yet, but I've got some pretty good signals so far.
Like you said, I enjoy when I'm allowed to opt into something, right? Where I'm going to get a reward in the game, and that's maybe some sort of multiplier or whatever, and I can watch a video, and that seems like a reasonable. It seems like a respectful contract between the player and the developer.
I think that's actually the biggest feedback I got when I first launched Street Puncher, because I just sort of threw the advertisements in there. I wasn't sure what sort of reception I would get. And some of the feedback was like they would enjoy like opting in and actually feeling like they had some choice in the matter. And so I'm testing different treatments for that. But yeah, we'll see which one sort of wins out.
Yeah. So you also have, kind of on the marketing front, I see that you have at some point you can earn 5,000 puncher bucks for
Yes.
sharing the game. How is that working out for you? Because it seems like when you play the game, you get a certain amount of puncher bucks, but the reward there is like, here's 5,000 puncher bucks for sharing the game. It seems like a huge incentive. Is that working for you?
Yeah, so with the in-game currency, it allowed me to incentivize different actions, right? And so the two primary actions I wanted to incentivize are rating the game and sharing the game. And so you get 5,000 punch bucks for both actions. And it's only a one-time deal. So if you share the game once, you get 5,000 punch bucks, but no subsequent times. I want to keep the value of punch bucks down here. But yeah, so I think I've seen a lot of success with sharing. Rating is something that you see just a lot of drop off with naturally. And in my experience in just the mobile app space in general, it's very difficult to incentivize rating, especially given some of the recent changes on iOS. And so I think, I've seen more success with sharing. And with that said, it kind of comes down to, from the developer's perspective, how do you value the in-game currency? So 5,000 punch bucks sounds like a lot, and it's supposed to sound like a lot. Like I want the user to actually feel like they're accomplishing something big. With that said, 5,000 punch bucks will allow you to purchase the first upgrade, and it'll actually get you maybe 2/3 of the way to the second upgrade. And so it's not a ton to actually get you all the way, but it's enough to actually reward the user in some way, in a material way beyond just giving you some arbitrary currency.
It's interesting. It's as you say that, I think in order for the player to understand that value, it almost seems like at that point you would need to communicate to them somehow that, that would help them accomplish that first level or whatever, right? Because I did go into the puncher bucks beforehand as I earned things. I went into the kind of the store and was like, oh, okay, I saw that, but I didn't focus in really hard on what it would take to get to that next level, right?
Yeah.
So having that piece of information at the point where I get the 5,000, the offer for 5,000 bucks might help me to like tip me over the edge.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that was also one of the first rounds of feedback that I got when I initially launched the game. It's just discoverability of the store. So a lot of folks weren't even aware that it was there. And so what was important to me was creating the affordance that there is a store. That's where you can get upgrades, and it helps promote longer gameplay. And so I've done a few tests on like how are the treatments to make this more prominent, make the upgrades more prominent, so that you actually are aware of the value of punch bucks in general.
Yeah, you definitely do a good job not to sort of push me into like, driving me to the store right away and being intrusive in that way. But at the same time, player needs to understand the value. So, okay, so it sounds like you've gotten great feedback. Is there anything that you would do differently at this point? Like, like something that you learned that was a big thing to share with somebody?
Yeah, I think a few things. So one would be localization right at the outset. I think that specifically for getting features in the App Store, that's super critical to make sure that you're localized for the different regions, especially the ones that you're trying to go after. I think that it's really easy, at least from my perspective, to just focus on the US App Store and hope that you get top game, in the charts. But the reality is that it's a big world out there, and you don't need to be at the top of the US App Store to actually be successful. And there's a lot of regions that are willing to feature your app if you localize, right? And so for Street Puncher, I didn't localize in the beginning. I was lucky enough to actually get featured in France and China. However, that probably comes from the fact that Street Puncher just doesn't have a lot of text to begin with. But I did get a lot of feedback, especially from anecdotal, like international friends, that, hey, you should just internationalize this, and it probably would have done better across the ocean. So I think step one would be to localize on day one. And then the other big piece of feedback that I'm definitely going to be pursuing going forward is just a lot more testing around the monetization models. So Like I've said, I have two primary models. You got in-app purchases, which come in the form of the currency in the store, and then also advertisement. And there's so many options for advertisements out there. And so I think being able to test with different advertisement models, also with ad units in general, so like doing static banner ads versus video interstitials, rewarded video interstitials, and actually seeing which hits with the audience is critical, I think, to make sure that you've got successful monetization there. And same goes for the in-app purchases. I think understanding the value of your currency, if you do have an in-game currency, and whether or not your user understands that value are two critical steps. I think for me, when I came to Street Puncher, I knew full well what the value of punch bucks were. However, going into my second update, I realized that a lot of the feedback I was getting was, hey, I've got a bunch of punch bucks, but what do I use them for? Mm. And so I think really doing a lot of user testing up front on whether or not your in-app purchase model is actually discoverable and is actually valuable to the user is also critical for day one.
Interesting. Okay. So future plans. You're on iOS now. What about Android?
Coming soon. So yeah, I've got I'm still working through Android right now. So as a single person team here, it's a bit of a longer pull, but I'm working on Android right now. And I've also got a few other games in the works as well. And so what I've started doing is testing them out on different platforms at first, and then porting them over to new platforms as I get more signal. Okay. Well, this has been great. So I want to give people an opportunity to follow your updates and to download the game. So where should they go to follow updates, and where should they go to download the game? So currently Street Puncher is on iOS. So go into the App Store and just search for Street Puncher and you'll see it there. And then to actually get updates, you can follow me on Twitter at Bobby Rasmussen, just my name. And also on Facebook, there's a Street Puncher page. So if you actually want to follow updates for Street Puncher, follow that page. Okay. I will put links to this in the show notes to all of those. So you guys go check those out. And Bobby, I really appreciate the time and the insights, and good luck to you with Street Puncher. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me.